by the white haole folks on the island who felt, oh, now we have all these great swimmers with all this potential. Oh, we better do this because this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
And instead, he was able to carry them through.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Garth, City on Fire is a big book, literally. At 900 plus pages, I was joking that I first need to thank you for getting my arms in shape for summer, because just holding the book up, that was what I felt I was doing. I heard you speak a couple weeks ago and again early this morning, and I noted you were born at the end of 1978, and City on Fire is set in 1976 and 77. So let's start with why you chose to write about the 70s, especially the latter part of the decade. So can you share with us what brought you to do that?
Sure. I think that's really intimately connected with the question of why I chose to write about New York. Because not only was I not alive in 1977, I wasn't in New York for much of the 80s and 90s. But I grew up in the kind of semi-rural South, sort of like the first character you meet in the novel. I'm not a native New Yorker, I'm a settler. And when I was a little kid, growing up out there, I kind of never quite felt like I fit in to the culture I was in, and books were always this tremendous escape for me, and especially books that sort of built a world. So Middle Earth was where I lived much of my childhood, and Narnia, and these fantastical places. And even at that age, reading about the city, it seemed like a kind of science fictional or quasi-utopian or fantastical destination that I wanted to be in part because I think, just a sense of cosmopolitanism of different kinds of people being connected to each other and building something together, as opposed to where I grew up, which was from one point of view pretty homogenous, and from another point of view pretty segregated along lines of race and class and sexuality. So New York had this sort of promise to me. Later on, when I was a teenager, I kind of became like the town's resident, 17-year-old beatnik, or I was like a little bit of a punk kid, and both of those scenes, beat literature and punk rock, and also the kind of avant-garde poetry I was into in my teenage years. The epicenter for that was not just New York, but New York in the past. And it seemed to me like, the era of Patti Smith, of Lou Reed, of all this music that I was listening to, really peaked somehow at this moment in the mid-70s that was, everything was kind of falling apart. Everything was risky and dangerous, but everything was also sort of possible because there was so much freedom. And I didn't really realize that this was going to be the place I went to and wrote this long book about until not long after September 11th. And I was on a bus in New Jersey coming to visit the city and trying to make contact with this world that had meant so much to me when I was a kid, and which now seemed to be, again, sort of on the verge of destruction. And that was going through this conversation again about, on the one hand, safety, security, stability, and order, and on the other, loss, risk, grief, possibility, connection. Some of you may remember that time in the early 2000s when we're all asking ourselves, like, what kind of world do we want to live in? Because the old one's not here anymore. And this Billy Joel song came up on my early generation like iPod on shuffle about the blackout of '77, and I'm looking across, New Jersey at the skyline, which is now missing this crucial piece, and I just heard this guy singing about, chaos and freedom and possibility, and I thought, we're kind of living through that moment again. Mm-hmm. And the book just came to me. I mean, I realized I wanted in some way to memorialize what we were living through at that moment, mm-hmm. in secret, by burying it in the 70s.
So how did you conduct your research to find out what was really going on in 1996, 97 besides Billy Joel's songs?
Very poorly would be the short answer, but I heard E.L. Doctorow say when someone asked him for Billy Bathgate, like, how much research did you do? And his answer was, just enough. If I was any kind of serious historical novelist like Hilary Mantel or someone for whom I have a great deal of admiration, you know, I would need to know every detail, you know, all along the great chain of being and how it all connected. But for what I wanted to do, which was not so much exhuming a literal, actual past as imagining a possible past, what I needed were more like textural details and zeitgeist. And so a lot of that stuff I had done already by watching Scorsese movies and listening to punk music, which is the best kind of research, right? But I did spend a summer holed up in the New York Public Library where I would read the New York Times every day for that day in 1977. And just like the ads and the pictures and what people were wearing, as much as the sports scores and what was going on in the news were crucial. And then I would get to go outside and sit on the front porch of the library and read Saul Bellow and Edith Wharton. So it was a perfect summer.
It was like completely different. Okay, I walked outside. It's not all, you know, the library still looked the same. There are 9 characters in this book. There are 10 if you consider the city a character, which I think is very much a part of the book. And each of whom is taking the story in a different direction, like as the book is progressing. But then everything's going to come together, and there's a shooting that leaves a lot of mystery for a good part of the book, and it seems to drive the story. So tell us why that's there, because it's a part of it that comes in right at the beginning.
Well, I mean, that sort of came in the initial conception. I mean, that moment that I was sitting there on that bus and you know, realizing that this book was going to write itself through me or whatever. I knew that there was, I mean, it was already a shooting to me, but I knew that there was a kind of tragedy at the heart of things that was somehow a kind of smaller version of the larger tragedy that we were living through in 2001, 2002, 2003. Because of the way that brushes with death are really what awaken us to what really means something to us in our lives. I mean, I was thinking this morning, like, you know, when something terrible happens, who's the first person you call? I mean, that tells you so much. So there had to be some sort of tragedy or possible tragedy at the animating heart of the book, bringing these characters out of the kind of illusions they've been living in into some greater sense of what they're capable of, apart and together. You know, the other nice advantage of that for me as a writer is I realized early on, given how big the book was going to be, that it was going to have to be really freaking fun. Because otherwise you're never going to get past page 3. You're going to, I don't read more of this. And when you look back at the great long 19th century novels that I love, Brothers Karamazov, Bleak House, these things I was thinking about, you know, there's always some sort of mystery or crime or something. So even though it was sort of an organic element of the conception, it also was, in literary terms, like a way to, a generator of suspense and excitement. And so I hope it remains that in the finished product.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dan, I don't know if I can top yesterday's presentation of your book, so I'm going to start just with the setup of your memoir. Home is Burning is pretty bleak. Your mom has had cancer since you were 10. For years, your dad took care of her, but then just as she's having a relapse, dad's diagnosed with ALS, and quickly you go from being this carefree guy in LA to coming home to take care of your dad and your mom. So the book moves between being poignant and sad, and poignantly and wickedly funny. I mean, really wickedly funny. So it started out as a blog, and can you talk to us about why you decided to write that blog, why you started doing that, and when you decided it was going to be a book?
Yeah, is this thing on? Can you guys hear me? All right. Yeah, so I don't know, it was, as I was going through it, I sort of realized that writing was a lot cheaper than therapy, and so I just started kind of writing about everything that was going on, and there's just all these kind of remarkable things that were happening. It was a combination of really sad things and really funny things, and it initially started, I have a friend Mike, and we would always email back and forth during college, and we all about girls we were trying to sleep with, or like trying new drugs or something like that, and then when I moved home, all this like crazy stuff was happening, and so I started like kind of emailing him about all of that, but kind of keeping the jokey tone that we would correspond with in email. So yeah, I just started kind of, and then Mike eventually was like, if you're willing to, you should post this up on a blog so you can share some of these stories with other people. So yeah, that's what I did, and it became a way of dealing with the situation and trying to digest some of the really heavy things that were going on.
Family, this really tough time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy disease because there's really you don't know what causes it, and there's really nothing you can do to cure it. There's things you can do to slow it down, and our family decided that we were going to try to do everything we possibly could to slow it down. So that meant having my dad go on a respirator, and he was in a feeding tube, and yeah, he was just kind of slowly losing pieces of his life as all of this was happening. So yeah, it's just a really terrifying disease, and just the fact that there's not a cure to it, it's just really, really scary for us too. But we tried as hard as we could to try to keep our dad around for as long as possible. And then, as you'll notice in the book, like we did a very sloppy, poor job of that. But we definitely tried to keep him around for as long as possible.
Now, which brings me to your whole family, which is extremely colorful group. I mean, I was definitely feeling like I was watching a television show and I feel like I really got to know everybody. I felt like if we walked up to them, I would actually know who they all were. So what have you heard from them about the fact that you've written this book, and have they read it?
Yeah, so my mom's initial reaction, she sent me a text message that just said, fuck you, Danny, and fuck your book, which we're using as a blurb now. So her initial response was really positive. She loved it. But yeah, I mean, it's a really hard thing to be written about, and so my family sort of had to deal with that a little bit. And my gay brother Greg he's a little pissy about it, and my two little sisters haven't read it yet, and I'm going to try to keep them from reading it for as long as possible. So, but yeah, I mean, overall they're happy for me, but it is a weird thing to be written about, and I do expose a lot of pretty personal details. So yeah, Chelsea, my little sister, keeps saying she's going to sue me. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how that goes. It'd be kind of fun to see her in a courtroom, I think.
Up against you, seeing like how much money she can get from her brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, you're writing the screenplay for this, and what's that experience like after writing the book? I know you were writing screenplays before this all happened.
Yeah, I mean, so far I'm just kind of jumping into it now, but yeah, I mean, I turned in kind of the final edits of the book in March, and I was so excited because I'm like, all right, I don't have to write about my dying dad for a little bit. This is going to be great. I can write about something else. And but yeah, then it sold like a month later, and I've had to jump right back into it. But yeah, it's been really positive. They're excited about it, and we have like Miles Teller is playing me, so I told him he needs to eat more gummy bears and gain a little weight, but yeah, it's really exciting. So hopefully it all comes together.
Because you deal with so many big issues. I mean, you deal with end-of-life issues. At the same time, you're dealing with everything that, as you said, you're not doing right with the family, but there isn't really a right in so many ways. And at the end of this, like, what do you want the readers to take away from the story about, like, dealing with something like this at the end? Like, in this end-of-life thing that you're really in front of, it's staring you in the face that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to handle any of these situations. It's just important to kind of get through it as a family, and yeah, I mean, there's really, as you'll see in the book, like, we obviously didn't do it, we were very sloppy in how we handled it, and there's no right or wrong way, and it's interesting because I think every single family member sort of dealt with it differently, and so like I'm hoping like a reader can connect at least with like one of the characters' responses to the situation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to give a spoiler away. Your mom is still alive today, too, which is really, really nice that she's actually being able to share that this book is going to be coming out. And
yeah.
talk about it with her friends with that great line about it, you know? Otessa. So, in Eileen, you've written a tight, slim novel about a lonely young woman with a troubled past who's working in a boys' prison outside Boston in the early 60s. And the core of the story takes place over a 1-week period and is narrated in the first person by Eileen as she looks back on this time in her life. Now, she's got one very troubled past. And while the tone of the book is confessional, Eileen looks back sort of unapologetically to me about her life. She has the tone that this is my life and I'm sticking to it. So I can't say that she's exactly likable, but how did you go about creating this protagonist?
Well, can you guys hear me? Okay. How did I go about creating her? I was curious what would happen if I had a character who was telling the truth about her feelings and her ideas and the way that she saw the world when her world totally sucked. You know, this woman was dealt a really bad hand, and I think the tendency when we, you know, imagine young women and like the kind of heroine we want in a novel, it's like, oh, here's this woman, you know, despite all these troubles, she came out a winner, you know? And it's like, actually, that's kind of BS. That doesn't happen, you know? Like when everything in the world is sort of conspiring against you, that's hard, you know? And when you're young, you're vulnerable, you have all these responsibilities that you're not prepared to take care of, you know, you either lash out or you turn inward. And, you know, Eileen, poor Eileen, she does both, you know? She's doing everything she can just to get the hell out of the situation. So yeah, she's maybe not likable, like she shouldn't be on like primetime TV, but she's real. She's relatable, you know? And you know, people keep calling the book like dark, you know? I'm like, well, hell yeah. It is dark. I mean, that's just the reality of what happens when someone's in a tight spot, you know? We're not going to be June Cleaver.
And she's definitely not.
She's not, you know, but she tries to hide what she really feels. And actually, I think one of the things that I'm happy about the book is it demonstrates that when we do that, we're really only hurting ourselves, you know? Because if shit is going to hit the fan, it's going to, you know, no matter what it looks like on the outside.
You know, the story's set in the 60s, and one of the things we talked about is how there were mores and guidelines then that are very different than are happening today. So a lot of what Eileen was up against was also constraints of being in that time period. So why did you choose to set the book in the 60s?
You know, I've been thinking about this question a lot. And I think I didn't have to. I didn't have to set it in the 60s. Like, things haven't changed that much. You know, they've changed just enough so that writing from, you know, 50 years later, the Eileen who's narrating now at age 75 can look back and say, oh, when I was 24, I took all this so seriously, talking about like sexism, you know, and maybe now in a later age she can sort of laugh at how ridiculous it was that she was treated so unfairly, and at the time she took it to heart, you know. But I think the story is sort of timeless in a way, you know. I did choose to set in the early 60s to set, like, basically to give Eileen an even harder time, you know. Having the world be as it was, you know, very out of balance. A young woman really wasn't given the same opportunities, and growing up in a small town like Expo, you know, what was she going to do? You know,
There was no support as there would be possibly today. There was nothing like that then.
no, and women weren't encouraged as they are today to go, you know, to school. She was expected to either get married or, you know, stay home with her parents and take care of her ailing father.
So there are hints throughout the story that Eileen is taking everybody someplace. Like, you know, like she's going to be taking you somewhere along for the ride. But where we end up is a surprise, and I'm not going to give away, like, you know, what happens.
Yeah.
So by the end, do you think Eileen's made peace with everything that's going on, that's gone on, that she was, you know, she was a part of?
Well, peace. I think the Eileen that we meet as the narrator, Eileen at 75, has made a certain kind of peace with herself, which is sort of the occasion for for telling the novel. You know, this isn't. She doesn't tell the novel in order to process it or work something out per se. It's just that I think she has made peace with what happened. You know, how this all came about, and wants to tell the story. And Eileen at 24, at the end of the novel, you know, the end of that week before Christmas, I think she has made a certain sort of peace with herself. It is a goodbye story. It's a goodbye to this life that I didn't want, you know, this life that was unfair, this life that was so trying, weird, creepy, you know, like this wasn't the life that I wanted, and I'm making peace with it by moving on. You know, so I think there is. I don't think that it's a fully. It's not a happy ending, but I hope the ending is. There's a sense of like liberation at the end.
It's like a satisfying ending.
Yeah.
It's a satisfying ending. It's all together there. I don't think I'm ever going to think of anyone saying they're going on a bachelorette weekend again, quite the same way after reading In a Dark, Dark Wood. Now, I saw in your bio that your own bachelorette party held none of this drama, a hen party, as you say in the book, which made me happy. And yesterday, after your editor's presentation, you also told me that you were very happily married, and we needed to like get that point on the record because it just seemed like there could be issues going on in all the characters' books. But creepy was on my mind from the first moment I looked at the cover. There's a lot tangled in these woods. So can you tell us how you came to start writing this book and the story?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I do have to start with the disclaimer for anyone who was at Alison's amazing presentation yesterday. My husband is wonderful. I'm not planning to, you know, dispose of him in any untoward way. If he's watching, I love you. I guess the seed for the book was a conversation with a friend, and she was saying that she had never read a thriller set on a hen night or, you know, bachelorette party. And I started to think about it, and I realised that I also had never read a thriller set at a hen party. And I couldn't quite work out why that would be, because it is the perfect setting. You know, you are often somewhere quite isolated, somewhere that you wouldn't necessarily have chosen to be, often with a group of people that you don't know very well, maybe some of them you don't like very much. There's a lot of pressures thrown in. I don't know, and maybe it's not the same for guys, but I'm sure every woman has had that email drop into her inbox that is requiring you to spend several £100s going to somewhere that you wouldn't necessarily have chosen to go. And yet you feel that you have to say yes, because it's an honour to be asked, you know, she's a friend, it's a bit of a slap in the face to say thanks, but I'd rather pocket the cheque. So you go. And when you get there, there's usually a variety of humiliating games. There's a lot of alcohol thrown in, sometimes some other substances. It's a recipe for things to go wrong. And having spoken to a lot of friends and people who've read the book, things do go wrong very often. Luckily not wrong to the extent that they do in my book. I can't really spoil it, but I haven't met anybody who's had quite such a disastrous hen night as the one in A Dark, Dark Wood. But yeah, it seems that there's a real kind of commonality of experience of being stuck in a strange place with strange people and having to make the best of it. And as soon as I started thinking that, I realised that this was a book that, not only a book that I wanted to read, but more importantly, a book that I wanted to write. And so I did.
Great. The story takes place in a very compressed period of time in one location. Did that make the story easier or harder to write?
I think it probably made it easier. I don't know, there were challenges in both directions. And I realised actually after I'd finished writing it and I was doing the edits and everything, I'm a massive classic crime geek, and I grew up reading, you know, Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers and Sherlock Holmes, all the greats. And it wasn't at the forefront of my mind when I was writing, but I realised that actually at the end of it, I had kind of created one of those Christie closed room mysteries, you know, where you've got a very finite set of circumstances finite group of suspects, and it's really a question of who did what when. And so I suppose I was kind of mirroring that in the time frame in a way. So for anybody who doesn't know the setup, basically Nora is invited to go on this hen weekend. And the hen weekend itself takes place over a period of about 48 hours. And the novel opens 48 hours after that, when she's in hospital. And you know that something catastrophic has happened. There's policemen outside her door. They want to talk to her. At first she thinks they want to talk to her about what's happened to her. And then she begins to suspect that it may be they want to talk to her about what she has done. And so you know right from the start that all the action is compressed into that very short period. It made it quite easy in terms of plotting, because I knew I had like a strict deadline when all the action had to be wrapped up by. And also actually because it was told in 2 timelines, it made it quite satisfying to write, because if I write chronologically, I just start at the beginning of the book and write until I get to the end. And so if I got to a bit where I was a bit stuck on one timeline, I could think, it's fine, we'll swap to the other timeline, we'll worry about that later.
This is Fall Classics representing. Represent. Fall Classics. Got it right here for you.
It was Lauren Groff's Arcadia, which I loved. Just loved. Such a sweet book.
Okay.
My mic's on. Okay, did you all love Arcadia? Yeah. met a woman on the subway in DC, and she was reading, and I introduced myself, and then she had me come to her house for her book club. We had this great time. And I met her here again today, 3 years later. I lost my, yes, you're there. I may begin. Good morning, my name is Ron Charles. I'm the editor of the book section at the Washington Post. I'm so glad to be here with Geraldine Brooks, one of my favorite authors. Thank you so much for doing this.
I would never turn down a chance to talk to the Totally Hip book reviewer. If you're not aware of Ron Charles's videos as the Totally Hip book reviewer, do yourself a favor. Hilarious.
Thank you. Let me just tell you a bit about Geraldine. Geraldine was born and raised in Australia, which accounts for that lovely accent. She came to the United States to complete a master's degree at Columbia University and soon got a job at the Wall Street Journal covering conflicts in Africa and the Balkans and the Middle East. That experience provided the material for her first book, 9 Parts of Desire, The Hidden World of Islamic Women, which went on to become an international bestseller. Several years later, after winning an Overseas Press Club Award for her coverage in the Gulf War, she took off her journalist cap and wrote a novel called The Year of Wonders about an Englishwoman during the plague in 1666. Many fans of that, too. Encouraged by the success of that book, she published a second one called March, based on the life of Bronson Alcott and the father figure in Little Women, and that won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's still one of my favorite novels. Since then, she published 2 more celebrated novels, People in the Book and Caleb's Crossing. Now, all of her novels have been dramatic works of historical reclamation and reimagination, but this upcoming book, The Secret Chord, is her most ambitious one yet. The Secret Chord is about David, King David, ruler of Judah, ancestor of Jesus, and Michelangelo's subject for the first Abercrombie & Fitch model. This story is incredible. I mean, I thought I knew these stories from my Sunday school days, but it's got war, intrigue, betrayal, sex, calling Olivia Pope. It is just amazing. Now, what was your inspiration to take on this enormous story?
It was my oldest son, when he was 8 years old. You know, I'm kind of the usual hovering over attentive mother, right? So you always hope your kid is going to want to learn an instrument, and you try and pass them by the piano and the violin, hoping it'll take. And you kind of braced for electric guitar or drums or something like that. I would have taken anything. This 8-year-old comes to me and says, "Mom, I must play the harp."
Where did he even see a harp?
I don't know. I think it was because we were reading a lot of fantasy literature, and there's always the thing where they say, "Bard, take up your harp and sing about how they slaughtered millions at what's it." So I think he associated it with that kind of fantasy world. Okay. And we just read the wonderful Merlin books where Merlin disguises himself as. I think that was it, but he can't recapture it either at this point. But anyway, there he was. Tiny little guy. I found him a harp teacher. Not easy. And he would sit there with her enormous, gorgeous, gilded concert harp, completely dwarfed by it. And that got me thinking about that other boy harpist from back in, as you say, the Sunday school memory banks, David, who was also a warrior and a poet and a king, but an outlaw. And I realized, I know a little bit of that story. I don't know much of it. And I was a little bored in synagogue one day, as you get. And I just picked up the book and started reading the story from soup to nuts. And I realized that, my God, everything happens to this man. There's no human experience that he doesn't have.
Now, your other books you've written about the plague in the 17th century or Bronson Alcott, you can rest assured that most of your audience doesn't know much about those obscure stories. But when you take on David, I mean, he belongs to Christianity, to Islam, to Jewish people. I mean, that story belongs to all of us. How do you do the research for a story so huge?
Yeah, well, we think, as you said, we think we know him because, for goodness sake, it's a cliche, the David and Goliath battle. You can't go through a week without hearing somebody use that expression. We know the famous story of, the adultery with Bathsheba, but there are better stories there, and we never hear about them. The wonderful story about how King Saul's daughter is the one who pursues David. She wants to marry him. She loves him. It says in the Bible, Michal loved David. Women don't even get named in the Bible most of the time, much less have any agency about expressing who they're in love with and who they want to get married to.
Right.
And then later on, she hates him for very complicated reasons to do with statecraft. And it is the most perfect arc of a love gone bad that I've ever read, and expressed with great economy in the Bible, which was wonderful to be able to explode and explore all the deep places of the human heart that you can get at through a story like that.
It's described in 1st and 2nd Samuel, Chronicles, Kings, 1st Kings. Was there other research you did?
Oh yeah, so David's all over the place in the Bible, but outside of the Bible, not a lot. There's one stone inscription that's been found, and only recently, that refers to him, which is a problem at first, because how do you do research on a guy where there's so little physical evidence? So what do? Well, you look at what did he do in his life? He started out herding sheep because he was kind of the spurned younger son of his family, and he's sent off to the Judean hills to look after the flocks. So I took my younger son and I went off to the Judean hills to herd sheep. And that's a great way to do research, because you feel it on your skin. You learn, what the time smells like when you tread on it, what the sounds are as you go through the day. You learn how to separate the sheep from the goats. That's a real thing. There's a little trick to it. And then you go and look at the archaeological record. What did people eat? When they describe him living in a palace, what was a palace? And I was thinking Second Iron Age, a palace probably wasn't much, right? But it was a palace. He had a big house,
This is about 3,000 years ago?
Yeah. So there's a building in Jerusalem buried now under layers and layers of other buildings, but they've made tunnels. You can get down there and you see the beautiful dressed stones and the way they were carved, and that is from the Davidian era, and it was probably his house.
Wow. I know you thought about this before, the whole problem of historical fiction. Henry James once complained about the fatal cheapness of historical fiction. He warns a friend in a letter, you may multiply the little facts that you can get from pictures and documents and relics and prints as much as you like, but you can't help an author with the invention of the representation of the old consciousness, the soul, the sense, the horizon. How do you confront that challenge when you go back that far?
So when I read that letter that he sent to another historical novelist from Maine, Sarah Orne Jewett, I had to leave my study, go downstairs and pour myself an adult beverage. And then I thought, well, I looked up her bibliography and I found that book that she'd sent him was the last one she ever wrote. And I thought, holy cow, he discouraged her.
Oh.
And then I read a little bit more about her, and I realized that she'd been in a carriage accident just after that correspondence, and she'd been gravely injured, and she died the following year. And I immediately started to imagine her in this carriage, and the slide of the horses' hooves losing their footing on maybe the ice over the main roads, and the disarray of her starched skirts as she flew into the air, and the crunch of breaking bones as she landed on the hard ground. And I thought, a pox on you, Henry James. Because this is what we do. We empathize. We put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And carriage, car accident, who cares? You can move the furniture around, but the emotions, the fear, the pain, the frustration that she must have felt not being able to do the work that she loved, the dread of death, of leaving this wonderful adventure that is our life, That doesn't change. It's no different for Sarah or Jewett than it is for me, and no different to people who lived 3,000 years ago. I believe that, so there's a big division in historical fiction writers that you can basically sum up as same or different. Are we more alike, or is the past another country? And I'm very much in the same category. I think that the human heart doesn't change that much, and that strong emotions are what shape our consciousness, not the furniture in the room.
Would you read a passage from the book?
Sure. So, the narrator, I love to work with a first-person narrator, and the guy who tells this story is a character that I absolutely love because he's described as the prophet Nathan. So what's a prophet? So that's a fun thing to explore. But his role in the story is basically this. He turns up and tells the king he sucks. And I thought, what is the career path for that guy? And then there's a couple of references in Chronicles saying that now the acts of David the king, first and last, are told in the book of Nathan. And we don't have any book of Nathan, right? So I thought, well, what kind of book, what kind of account of David's life would Nathan have given? And how did he come into the path of the king? So I imagined him meeting up with David when David is on the run, when King Shaul has turned against him and he's hiding out with a bunch of bandits. And this boy is also a shepherd, the son of a winemaker, and they meet in the hills. And David tells him to ask his father to give his outlaws supplies. And the father refuses. And so this is what happens. A dozen wineskins and a few bushel of dates. It would have been a small price, and I might have lived a different life. I might have stayed in that village, lit by the glare of the salty sea, grown to manhood, the beloved son of a prosperous house, learning to become a winemaker at my father's side, feeling the weight of the warm grapes fall into my hands as each long summer ripened, plying the pruning knife with skill till the long rows of old vines held their bold fists up to the winter sky. By now, the vineyards would be mine to tend, and I would be teaching my sons in their turn. Or so I like to think. But perhaps this other destiny could not have been gainsaid. I do not know. All I do know is that no supplies were delivered, and I was instructed to take the goats by the southern wadi rather than the stream that ran to the north. 2 days later, David sent to ask again. One of his men, a youth really, no older than David himself, presented himself in the village asking for my father. He was received and put his requests, or I should say demands, rather more urgently than David had put them to me. My father became angry. I heard him say hard words, traitor, brigand, thief. The young man became angry then in his turn. He raised his voice even louder than my father's, so that I could hear every word he said as if I were in the room. You dare to speak so of a man whose spittle you are not fit to wipe. David, son of Yeshai, is the rightful leader of our people, the best leader, the best man any of us has ever served. The king in Juba knew that once. Did he not make David his son-in-law before madness seized him? Now he hates David for his very qualities, which are a reproach to his own failures. My father cut in then, loud, angry, saying that he would not have such disloyal words uttered in his house. He was not a stupid man. He could see the danger by then, I am sure. Yet he did have a stubborn streak and a regard for his own opinions. Small flaws, maybe, to cost such a price as he paid for them. But he could not unbreak the eggshell. A few moments later, the tall young stranger pushed past me, thrusting me against the wall so hard that the stone bit into the bare skin of my upper arm. When he looked me in the face, I saw naked anger. For perhaps 1,000 men, that look has been the last thing they ever saw. David's messenger to my father was Joab, who had become our mighty general, though on that day I did not yet know his name. At dawn, I walked through my father's blood and stood face to face with his killer. David had come in the dark, swift and silent. He slew my father and my uncle Barak with the dispatch of a slaughterman attending to his trade. As I approached David, I could hear my mother screaming. Her voice was horrible, a ragged rasp. "Stay back," she cried. "Run, hide yourself." But I had done with obeying. I could no more heed her than stop my own heartbeat. I walked up to David. He looked down at me, puzzled. I imagine he saw a tear-streaked child, too touched or stupid to fear the blood-flecked murderer who stood before him. "Did you not hear me, little shepherd? Did I not say I would kill all of his kin that can piss against a wall?" Joab lifted his spear, but I just stood there. David raised his hand wearily. "The boy's simple," he muttered. "Let him be." He shrugged and turned aside. Then I spoke. Later, others had to tell me what I said. I knew that my lips and tongue were moving, but I could not hear my own words because my head was ringing like a stone under the blows of an iron mallet, blows that beat the blood behind my eyes. I stood there in the crimson-misted ruins of my own life, and the words poured out. Through the red blur, I saw the faces of his fighters distort with wonder. Joab lowered his weapon and gaped. David's own face creased, confused. Then it changed. His look became greedy. He spoke, but I could not make out his words through the thunder in my head. I saw him reach out to me, and then I fell.
It is the beginning of such a bizarre and remarkable relationship. This friendship between a man who killed his entire family and this boy.
Yeah.
Now, all your books have dealt with faith, what you call the faith in times of catastrophe. But what about your own faith? How did that play into your construction of this book?
I'm how can I put this? I don't actually believe in God, but I have a quest after the spiritual side of life. I get a great deal of satisfaction from attending Jewish services because I feel completely comfortable with being in a room where you think about how human beings have struggled with the big questions for millennia. And I love it that at the height of the service, what you bow to is a book. That represents to me our struggle to understand our purpose and the quest to make sense of our wonderful brief journey as the universe being conscious of itself. You know, there may be, I hope there are many other conscious beings out there in the giant cosmos, but we're the only ones we know of for sure. We're the only people who get to observe this amazing universe, and I love being in the presence of other people who are struggling with those big ideas.
Let's talk about the supernatural. As a Bible story, this story is not, it doesn't have a lot of supernatural elements. It has some incredible elements, but not, there's no walking on water, there's no staffs turning into snakes.
That's what I really love about it, because it's really the first time in the Bible where nothing too woo-woo actually happens.
Right, right.
David lives a human life. God does not speak to him directly.
Yes.
And he struggles with his faith, you know.
But he does speak, or Nathan believes he's speaking to him, through
God,
him, striking him.
Nathan believes that those voices, you know, are, you know, it says in the Bible that David was a man after God's own heart, and then you learn what he did, and you go, huh? Yeah, but that to me is a very human predicament, you know, and for people who find that idea consoling, that we will fail, but we can be forgiven if we atone.